Okay, so last week we started talking about monopolistic competition, and we got a little bit far. Hopefully today we can finish this, and if we have some time left, we can move over to oligopoly. Okay, so let's do some reviews first with monopolistic competition. So, what is a monopolistic competition? What are any of the characteristics that any of you remember? What do you guys remember? So, how many farms?
When one firm is ruling everything.
That, Harry, would be monopoly. So when there is one single firm with monopolistic competition, now we have a blend of perfect competition and also monopoly. So they share some characteristics with perfect competition and some with monopoly. So first of all, number of farms, right? There are a large number of relatively small farms, right? Remember this? There will be a large number of relatively small farms in monopolistic competition. Okay, and there are more farms than a monopoly market, but obviously there are less than perfect competition. And therefore, because there are large number of relatively small farms, each farm, because they're just relatively small compared to the entire market, so they have a relatively small share of the entire market. Okay, and then we talked about the type of product that they're selling. What do you remember about that? Is it identical products? Is it unique, or what is it?
Well, what was the question?
What type of product are they selling?
Uh, I know. Wait, let me remember. Um,
Somebody else.
I
Joseph.
think that like if you increase the price, they will still buy it.
Um. Okay. So that's kind of similar to Monopoly. I think that you're referring to that they have an original product, that they have a unique product that you have no substitute for. But with monopolistic competition, they have differentiated products. So the products are different from each other, but it's not so different that you wouldn't be able to find substitutes for it elsewhere. So there are close substitutes available. Okay, so that's monopolistic competition. So Harry, I feel like you are more familiar with monopoly, so this is why it's, I know it's hard, it's confusing to not get confused with the two, but you'll have to remember they are different than monopoly, but then they share some characteristics that are similar. But then also, the name itself should tell you that it is a blend of perfect competition and also monopoly. So there will be some similarities, but also some differences. Okay, and then what about barriers to entry? Is it easy to enter a monopolistically competitive market or hard to come and go?
Hard.
Hard. So remember, with monopolistic competition, it's actually not that hard. It's relatively easy to enter or to exit.
Monopoly.
Yes. So monopoly is the only one that have huge barriers to it. It's almost impossible, right? Easy to enter or exit. So this way, it is very similar to perfect competition. Okay.
Okay.
And then what was the last one? Okay, let's talk about that. So, what are some examples of monopolistically competitive markets that we talked about?
Or what?
What are some examples of monopolistic competition?
Soap.
soap?
Like a soap company.
Okay. I guess you could be a large number of relatively differentiated. Maybe yes. So some of the examples that we talked about in class, where like restaurants are good examples. So soaps, if they're really different from each other, so the reason we talk about like restaurants or clothing or haircut, maybe soap might work. I don't see why not. So with restaurants, you have, it's food, right? But then everybody is serving something different. But at the end of the day, it's still food, to get you, to meet your hunger. And clothing, right? Everybody, if you think about a clothing stores in a large shopping mall, okay, there are differentiated products, but also it's not like they're completely unique, right? So if you can usually find close substitutes. If you don't like one brand or another, you can go from one clothing store to another, and in essence you would be able to find some close substitutes, if you didn't get the one you wanted. And haircut, right? Or hair product services, we talk about those, regarding when we talk about monopolistic competition, right? Because there tends to be relatively large number of um, hairdressers, in a neighborhood. They might be a little bit different than each other, in terms of the people, the services available, but at the end of the day it is still a service, right? That is kind of similar too, right? It's haircut all at the end. Okay. What about the demand curve? What would the demand curve for a monopolistic competition looks like? Is it perfectly elastic? Is it flat? Is it downward sloping? What does it look like?
It is a little bit. It is elastic.
Okay, so that, remember, elastic demand curve only occurs or only happens with perfect competition. So remember, this is perfect competition. This is perfectly elastic demand curve. Okay, so that will only happen in perfect competition. Everywhere else, and the reason this is the case with perfect competition is because the product that they're selling is completely identical. There is no difference. So every time they sell one more, their marginal revenue is equal to their price, and then they wouldn't be able to raise their price even a little bit. Their demand would just go to zero, and they wouldn't lower their price. They have no reason to lower their price, because all of this comes from the fact that the product they're selling is identical. But with monopoly and monopolistic competition, the demand curve, let's talk about monopolistic competition, right? The demand curve for each individual farm is downward sloping. Okay, so this is the demand curve, and in the same way their marginal revenue curve is also downward sloping and less than the demand. Okay, so this is the case with monopolistic competition and also with monopoly, but there is some differences with monopoly as well. So remember, with monopoly, right, the demand curve that a monopoly faces, right, is the same as the market demand curve. So with monopoly, because there is only one farm, and that farm is also the market, so this demand curve is the same as the market demand curve. The farm and the market are all the same in monopoly. But with monopolistic competition, right, This is the demand curve that each individual farm will face, and it is not the same as the market demand. The market demand is gonna be, the combination or the aggregate of all of those individual farm demand curves. That is different. But we just focus on what the we don't focus on the market when we talk about monopolistic competition, right, so much. So we only focused on the market and the farm when we talked about perfect competition. Remember, we had these two graphs side by side, but then when we started monopoly, we said that we don't have to do these side by side comparisons anymore. That is only with perfect competition. So when we talk about monopolistic competition now, we're only interested in what is happening at the farm level. So we don't really draw what is happening, or try to demonstrate what is happening at the market level. Okay, so here, this is about individual farm. The individual farm, they face a downward sloping demand curve, and their demand curve, it will be, demand curve is more elastic. It is relatively elastic, which means that their demand curve is more flatter, right? It's gonna be flatter compared to the monopoly. Demand is more elastic, I'd say, than monopoly. And what is the reason for this? Who can guess? So what does elasticity have to do with? Elasticity, remember, has to do with how do you respond, right? How does your quantity demanded respond when there is a change in price? With monopoly, right, we said that their demand would be more inelastic. So this is monopolistic competition. Okay, this one. So if we were to draw a demand for monopoly, it would be more steeper, right? It's not as flat, it would be more steeper with monopoly. And the reason for the demand curve to be, like the slope of the demand curve to be different, right? um, the monopoly is more inelastic because of the product that they're selling, which is unique. Nobody else has it. So even if there was a huge increase in price, the quantity demanded would not go down by as much. Whereas with monopolistic competition, there are close substitutes available. So even if one farm, raised their prices, you can just, go to another farm and find something that is at least a closed substitutes. Okay, does that make sense? Hello?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I know it's a lot of information to take in, but hopefully this is all review to you guys and it's not new information. Okay, so it's just a matter of bringing it all back from your memory, which is what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to jog your memory. Okay, and then, so how do we figure out profit maximization? How do monopolistically competitive farms figure out how much to produce? Okay, can you give me 1 second?
Yes.
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, I'm back. So then let's talk about profit maximization. So, how is it that a monopolistically competitive farm decides how much to produce? I see a lot of students are having trouble with this. Anytime we say or talk about profit maximization, I want you to think about, so this is referring to, it's always going to refer to how much to produce. So this is referring to quantity. Okay, so how much should you produce that will maximize your profit? And the answer is always going to be, so with monopoly, with perfect competition, with monopolistically competitive farms, it is always going to be where MR is equal to MC. This is how much you will produce. This is where you will find your Q star, always. Okay? And then we looked at how they find the price. They find price, right, by finding where that quantity meets the demand curve. So it looks something like this. So if this is the demand curve, this is marginal revenue. So remember to always draw the marginal revenue curve, halfway between the demand. So it's gonna bisect the horizontal axis halfway. Okay, if you draw your demand over here, don't draw marginal revenue all the way out here. That wouldn't make any sense. So you have to show that it's like halfway, where that demand would cross the horizontal axis. Okay, do you understand what I just said?
Yes.
Okay. So then we draw the marginal cost curve, and then at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, where they are equal to each other, this is the quantity that the monopolistically competitive farm will produce to maximize profit. Okay, this is Q star. And they will find price, right? The price they're gonna charge is this way. They're gonna take this quantity and take it all the way up to their demand curve, and this is where the Q star crosses the demand curve, right? So this is the price that they're gonna charge, P star. And then if we were to show profit or losses in this graph, we're gonna need to bring in another curve. Which curve is that?
Elasticity.
Another cost curve. Remember? So anytime when we have marginal cost, we have demand, we have marginal revenue. The other thing that we need to bring in here is the average total cost curve. So your average total cost curve will help you to visualize the profit. Okay, so here we're saying that we're giving a demonstration of how how there can be profits in the short run in monopolistically competitive farm. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna draw an average total cost curve, and we see that there is the average total cost curve meets Q star over here. So all of this would be your profit. Okay, so monopolistically competitive farms can have profits in the short run, and they can also have losses. So this is what we saw next. Okay, so this is an example of a monopolistically competitive farm that is making economic losses. So now, because we're gonna talk about losses. So I'm gonna put the average total cost curve, much higher. So it should look something like this. So my my average total cost of Q star is over here. Right? So all of this then would be my loss. Yes, all of this should be pretty familiar. This is what we have been doing from ever since perfect competition. Okay. Then what we looked at is how there is adjustment in the long run. So this is something we talked about when we talked about perfect competition, right? But we didn't see this in monopoly, this idea of adjustment that happens in the long run. And the reason we didn't see that is because why? And does anybody remember? Why is it that we have to talk about adjustment with perfect competition and monopolistic competition, but not with monopoly? Joseph?
I don't know.
Okay. So the reason, right, the underlying reason for this, is that barriers to entry. With perfect competition and also with monopolistic competition, it is very easy to enter or exit those markets, right? With monopoly, right, there were huge barriers to entry or exit, right? Which is why in the long run, we saw that with perfect competition, each farm in perfect competition made zero economic profit in the long run. It is the same, right, idea in monopolistically competitive market too, right? In the long run, each farm in a monopolistically competitive market will earn zero or normal economic profit. And it's because there are no barriers to entry or exit. So new farms can enter the market when they see that there are profits being made in this type of market. And the way they do that, is that when new farms come in with a differentiated product, they're going to steal some customers away from existing farms, right? So what happens is that the demand for the existing farm, the product, the demand for the product for the farms, the original farms or the existing farms goes down. So demand goes down for existing farms when new farms enter market. Okay, so this is what happens when new farms enter the market. The demand for the product for the existing farms goes down, so the demand curve essentially shifts downward. I'll show it to you on a graph on the next page, but here, just understand the logic around it. Okay. And the same thing, when farms in this kind of monopolistically competitive industry are making losses in the short run, in the long run, they're going to exit the market, right? And they can do that because, it's not very hard to do. So when they exit the market, right, the customers they were serving, right, have to go elsewhere. And they're gonna go to the farms that have remained in the industry. So what that essentially does, it adds demand to remaining farms. So demand increases for remaining farms when farms exit the market. Okay, so in one hand we have demand going down when farms enter the market, and on the other hand we have demand going up when farms exit the market. So let's take a look at how that looks on a graph. So here we're gonna, so before we do that, so let's see the type of market we're talking about here, monopolistically competitive farm, is a hot dog shack. Okay, so it's a kind of, hot dog shack. Here we have the individual farm. Here is Bob's hot dog shack. So he has many competitors, and these are some of his competitors: David, Gerard, Maya, Daniel, and Abe. And this is what his demand curve looks like. Okay, this is demand. This is his marginal revenue curve. This is the marginal cost. This is Q star, and this is P star. So the average total cost curve, of course, is going to be below, right? Because here, what we're showing here is that this hot dog shack, right, for Bob, he was making economic profit in the short run. So here we're just gonna show what happens in the long run, what kind of adjustment happens in the long run now that he's making economic profit in the short run. Okay, so I'm gonna draw the average total cost curve. So this is, and then the average total cost curve, I'm gonna do like this. Okay, so this is his average total cost curve, and of course, this is where the profit box would be. But I'm not gonna draw all of it again because I have to show these adjustments, and I just don't want the graph to get too messy. Okay, but do you guys see that this is where the profit would be? Hello?
Yes.
I can't help you guys if you don't tell me if you're understanding, or if all of this is going above your head. So you're gonna have to let me know sometimes. Okay, so this is the profit. Okay, and now we're gonna see, to imagine that this farm is making economic profits in the short run, and in the long run, other farms are going to enter this market because it's easy to enter. So when that happens, the demand curve, the demand for Bob, his hot dogs, is gonna go down because Joseph is coming in with some fancy hot dog sauces, and what else he has, other type of options available too. So some customers from Bob are actually gonna go and buy hot dogs now from Joseph. So the demand for Bob's hot dogs are going down. So the way we show that is by shifting his demand downward parallelly. Okay, so we're gonna shift his demand curve downward, and we're gonna do it a parallel shift. Oops, something. This. So this is his new demand curve, which is shifting downward, and the same thing with the marginal revenue curve. The marginal revenue curve is gonna shift parallel to the original MR. So it's gonna look something like this. So this is MR2. And what you should notice here now is that there is gonna be a new profit maximizing quantity and a new price. So the profit maximizing quantity, the new quantity, is over here. Okay, this is at the intersection of MR2 and MC. So this is where it is, right? So this is, Q2, and then the new price is over here at P1. Oh, sorry, at P2. Okay, so you see here that the new price is lower than before, the new quantity is lower than before, and it just happens that P2 is now equal to average total cost at this quantity Q2. Okay, P2 is equal to average total cost. So what does that mean? What kind of profit do you have if that is the case? You have zero economic profit. Okay, so anytime you have a situation where your price is equal to your average total cost at this, at the profit maximizing quantity, you're going to be making zero economic profit. So that is the whole point of this, is that even if you're making economic profit in the short run, you're not going to be able to keep this in the long run, right? You can't keep economic profit, positive economic profit in a long run. In the long run, you will always have zero economic profit because new farms are going to enter and they're going to shift, decrease the demand for your product. Okay, any question?
No.
Okay, so now let's quickly take a look at what happens with short run losses. We have price and quantity, we have demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost. Okay, this is Q star. This is P star over here. So here we're talking about losses now. So I'm gonna draw the average total cost curve higher. So this is average total cost, and my loss would be, so I probably shouldn't do that. Let me just. Okay, so it looks something like this. Okay, so this would be, so all of this would be the loss. Okay, because this is your price, but then the average total cost of producing Q star is all the way up there, right? So this would be the loss. Okay, so now let's take a look at what happens if this monopolistically competitive farm is making economic loss in the short run. Okay, this is price and this is average total cost. So once again, the logic is the same. Okay, so if they're making losses in the short run, in the long run, they're going to want to exit the industry. Okay, and when that happens, remember I said that some of the customers, that were being served by these farms that are now exiting are gonna go to the farms that have remained, and so the demand for the farms that have remained, the demand for their product is now going to increase. So their demand curve shifts outward, and it's gonna shift parallelly once again. So this is D1, which have shifted parallelly, and I'm going to do the same thing for the marginal revenue curve. Okay. So this is new MR, MR2. So the intersection of MR2 and MC happens over here now. So this is the new quantity, which is higher than before. And then the price is also higher than before. This is P2. Right, so the price increased, quantity increased, but price increased, right? P2 is once again equal to average total cost, right, at this Q2. So P2 is equal to average total cost. And when I do both sides, multiply them by quantity, I see that total revenue is equal to total cost. So I have zero economic profit in long run. So the underlying idea, right, the concepts are still same as perfect competition. It's just, that the demand curve and the marginal revenue, they look a little bit different. But the idea is the same, is that the short run profits or losses are not going to exist in long run. Okay, so in long run, economic profit will equal to zero, right? And this, we saw that with perfect competition, and now we're seeing this with monopolistic competition as well. Okay, any question?
No.
Okay. If not, so this is how the long run equilibrium will look, right? They'll only make normal profits in the long run, where price is equal to ATC. So regardless of whether you have profit or you're making losses in the short run, in the long run they will always have a graph that looks like this, where price is equal to average total cost, right? So all of this is concerning this quantity Q star. So at this quantity of Q star, this is the price, this is also the average total cost. So this will always happen with monopolistically competitive farms in the long run. Okay, and then we are gonna take a look at this idea of efficiency. Remember, we had these two concepts of allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency has to do with this idea that your demand is equal to your marginal cost. Okay, so this is when you are producing the quantity that society desires. So demand is your willingness to pay, which is also equal to price, right? So we can also write it as P equals MC or D equals MC. Okay, so they're the same thing. So allocative efficiency has to do with the idea whether you are producing the amount that society desires. You're not producing more, you're not producing less, but you're producing exactly as much as society wants you to produce. So we see that in perfect competition. In perfect competition, price is equal to marginal cost. Okay, because in perfect competition, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, but demand is equal to marginal revenue, which is also equal to price. So all of these things are actually equal to each other in perfect competition. Okay, so when we have perfect competition, P is equal to MC. This happens over here. So this is imagine that we're looking at it from the perspective of monopolistic competition. So I'm gonna actually get rid of not this. So, oops. Okay. Anyway, so let me just draw this over here. So if we were talking about perfect competition, okay, remember that their demand is equal to their marginal revenue, right? It looks something like this. Perfect competition. So if this were perfect competition, demand would equal to marginal revenue, right? There would not be a second curve for marginal revenue. So in perfect competition, the marginal revenue equals marginal cost over here. Okay? So this is how much would be produced if this were a perfectly competitive market. Okay. So this is QC. This is how much would be produced in a perfect competition, and this would be PC. This is how much they would charge for producing this QC. Okay, but because this is a monopolistic competition, right? We know that their marginal revenue curve is over here. It is below their demand curve, and the quantity that they're going to produce is over here. Right? This is the quantity that the monopolistic competition will produce. But the price they're going to charge is over here, PMC. Okay, so this is price for monopolistic competition. This is price for perfect competition. This is quantity for monopolistic competition. This is quantity for perfect competition. So perfect competition produces higher quantity and they charge a lower price, but monopolistic competition is charging a higher price and they're producing less, right? Society desires QC, right? This is how much society wants. And they want, they want a price of PC. But the monopolistic competition is charging a higher price and they are producing a lower quantity. So what that leads to is this triangle in the middle, right, which is this triangle over here, which is a deadweight loss. So this is an area that goes to neither consumer nor producer. This is just lost. It just sort of vanishes because we're moving away from this quantity, socially optimal quantity of QC, and this price PC. So when that happens, when we move away from this QC and PC and charge a higher price and produce a lower quantity, we'll always have deadweight loss. So perfect competition, right, there will be no deadweight loss. At the competitive PC and QC, there will be no deadweight loss. But at the monopolistic quantity and price, there will be deadweight loss. Okay, so that is the whole takeaway from here, that allocative efficiency is not achieved in monopolistic competition. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite it as MC. MC is monopolistic competition. Okay, and then the last bit is this idea of productive efficiency, and this is our last slide, and you can go after we finish this. Okay, so productive efficiency is this idea of producing this quantity Q where price is at the minimum of average total cost. Okay, so not price. So you are gonna produce quantity where you're not price. So you're gonna produce quantity. You're gonna produce an amount where your average total cost will be minimized. Okay, so what we see here is that with monopolistic competition, they're gonna, in the long run, right, we see that this is how much they're going to produce, this quantity Q star, and this is how much they will charge, this price of P star. So here, in this situation, right, they don't have any economic profit, right, they're making zero economic profit. But what happens is that they're not producing this quantity QE, right? If they produced QE, their average total cost would be at its minimum, right? So at this quantity QE, average total cost will be at its minimum, but they don't do that. They produce a lower quantity Q star so that they can charge a higher price P star. So even though they can produce more, they have this excess capacity, right? The difference between QE and Q star is this excess capacity. So they are able to produce more, but they intentionally choose not to. Okay, so productive efficiency is not achieved with monopolistic competition. Okay, because they don't produce quantity where average total cost is at minimum. They produce Q star, which is where the average total cost is not at minimum. Okay, so the difference here is that they could have produced more, and by producing more at this quantity QE, they could have, their average total cost could be at the minimum point, but they deliberately, intentionally decide to produce at Q star because they can charge a higher price of P star. If they were to produce more, they would actually have to charge a lower price, right? Even if their cost is lower, they would also have to charge a lower price. So they don't want to do that. They want to produce a lower quantity and charge a higher price. So that's how they don't achieve productive efficiency either. Okay, any questions, you guys? So we have finished monopolistic competition today as well. Next week we will, or next Thursday we will get started with oligopoly. Anything, if you have any questions, this is a good time to ask.
No.
Okay, then I will see you all on Thursday. Thank you.